Hello and welcome to another episode of Frugal Finance. So today what we're going to look at is how to issue service charge demands. So it's a leasehold thing. So if you live in a leasehold block of flats and you self-manage or you just want to know more about how the invoicing process works, this video is going to basically cover the pitfalls and the things to look out for and the sort of minimum requirements. So without further ado, please do hit the like button. Don't forget to comment below if you've got any questions. Please subscribe to the channel. It really helps these videos get out to a wider audience. And with that said, please, let's get stuck in. So service charge demands, not a very exciting thing to particularly touch on, but actually a really important thing. So the main issue I see with the self-managed building as opposed to the managed building is that there's a real disconnect or understanding between the terms of the lease and actually what people really want out of it. So what I mean by that is if you take our example of a mid-terrace Victorian house that's been converted into, say, 4 flats, 5 flats, whatever, that kind of thing. And you've got a mixture of people that have got their own entrances in the basement, you've got the communal stairwell, you might have someone with a garden, someone with a fire escape, someone with a nice grand entrance up to the front of the building, all that kind of stuff. And the generalisation is that they call it the house. And then what happens is that the lease seems to sort of go out the window in terms of budgeting and service charge and all that kind of stuff. And what they do is they agree that the running costs are, say, £2,000 because there's insurance and maybe some, minor repairs or something like that. So they agree that they're all going to pay £50 a month into a pot. Now, first of all, there's absolutely, must check the lease because probably they're all not allowed to stick, well, not allowed, but under the terms of their lease, they will have a percentage split. So the basement may pay less than the rest because it doesn't have any access to the communal hallways. So paying £50 each into the pot equally is probably the first no-no. But let's say that is correct, or we get past that. So everyone's chucking in £50 into the pot every single month. And then a big expense comes along, like the communal hallway needs redecorating, or there's some damp issues, or the roof leaks, or whatever, and there's not enough money in the pot. That's when the arguments start. Oh, well, I don't think I should contribute to the roof, all that kind of stuff, because I'm in the basement. Why am I paying for the fire alarm to be repaired? It doesn't even cover my flat. I've got a fire escape. Do I have to pay for that? All these sort of things. So it's really important to follow the lease. And obviously, first of all, budget for those eventualities, because the lease might not allow you to actually just chuck money in the pot. So if that roof needs leaking and it's going to cost £1,000 and there's 5 of you, to go and ask everybody for £250 might not be a legal thing that you can actually do in the lease. And it's probably perfectly fine. All the time you're all pals and everybody's all happy. But when that one person who's in the basement, for example, we're picking on them a bit, when they get a problem and they decide they don't want to pay towards the roof because they don't feel they should have to, because John on the top floor, whoever it might be, has got access to the loft space and therefore they get extra storage or something, and they feel a bit hard done by that, and they should pay for the roof in their opinion. But obviously the lease specifies who should be paying for the roof, and it's probably all of you because it's the fabric of the building. That person won't want to stick their 200 quid in the pot. You now have a problem because you haven't followed the lease, you haven't asked for the money in line with the splits in the lease, and the lease may also not allow you to ask for money in the middle of the year. It may say the budget year runs March to March. That's quite typical. They run on a thing called Old English quartile dates: 25th of December, 25th of March, 25th of June, and 29th of September. So generally speaking, the lease will say 25th of March to the 24th of March is your budget year. So you need to budget for that period and not just keep having, sporadic amounts of money chucked into the pot. So that's the first thing that you need to take into consideration, is that you might all be friends right now, but obviously in the future there may be a dispute over the service charge, and therefore following the lease is king. I always say the lease is king. I get lots of staff coming in to me and saying, what's the problem with this, or what do I do with that? And the very first thing I ask them is, what does the lease say? Because that is your contractual obligation. So moving on from that, let's assume that you've read the lease, you've got all the clauses in, you know what you're doing. So what do you have to do? Well, you must send the service charge demands out in line with the lease. So if it says that you must send one bill out in March and that's for the whole year, you must do that. If it says that you'll be presented with a bill in March and September, which is commonly found in leases, you must do that. And you must actually go through the physical act of presenting a bill. If you don't do that at later date, if you need to, in terms of pursuing somebody for the debt, it will become really problematic because you've never officially sent them a budget and a copy of their invoice. Also, for tax reasons, if you're a buy-to-let landlord, you need to know what the service charge is. That is tax deductible off of your tax return. So you need a copy of an invoice. You can't just say, I chuck 50 quid randomly into a pot. HMRC won't buy into that. They need the freeholder or the managing agent or the residence company to send you an invoice. You need evidence of what that money is for. You can still pay monthly. That's often not a problem. So you could pay £50 a month, but you still need proof of the service charge, proof of the invoice. So that's the second thing. So you need to send out a bill in line with the lease. Now the bill has to have a certain amount of requirement on. On the front page, it's obviously got to be addressed to the person. It's got to have the property details. It's got to say what it is. So it's the service charge for March to September, if it's a 6-month one, or March to March, and the year. And then there is some small print wording on the bottom, which I'm not going to give you in this particular video. I'm sure you can search the internet, but there's a whole load of stuff about landlords and who the freeholder is and the rest of it, which needs to be on the invoice. And the same for ground rent, slightly different style of invoice, but again, it's very specific wording that's supposed to be on the invoices. Not as much for service charge. So if you're residents and you've purchased your freeholder, you've enfranchised and you are the shareholders or the owners of the building, you probably won't be issuing ground rent bills, but the service charge do need those bare minimum things. And then on the reverse, there's actually a whole load of wording, which is basically A4 size bit of paper, so a lot of wording that must be printed on the back. If you don't print that on the back, the invoice is not valid. It is completely not valid, so you can just chuck it away and that's it. And a tribunal will do that if the wording has not been printed on the back, or you can't demonstrate that it was attached to an email or something along those lines. You need to show that that wording was there, because that gives the leaseholder, the person receiving the invoice, the rights and their obligations to that invoice. So how they might complain about it, how they might challenge it, what they can and can't challenge, all that kind of stuff is all listed on the back of it. There's also administration fees listed on the back of it. There's a separate thing about when you do fine people, but there's a list of all it's called the tenant's summary and rights of obligations. And that must go on the back. If you forget to put it on the back, it's not the end of the world, because you can reissue the invoice. But of course, if you're suing somebody because they owe a whole load of service charge and they say, well, none of the invoices I've ever had have had the wording on the back, you've got to start from square one. So that's really important that you put the wording on the back, or demonstrate that it was attached to an email or was enclosed. You don't necessarily have to print it on the back. I know a lot of managing agents enclose it as a separate sheet. So as long as it was there and you can demonstrate that, there's reasonable practice that your business or your block, you put it inside with the invoice, then you are fine. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, well, I'm not the leaseholder, I'm shareholders. Well, you are both actually. So if you're an enfranchised building, you're a limited company, so let's call the block Frugal Finance building, and Frugal Finance Limited is the freeholder, you are still a shareholder of Frugal Finance, the building, if you like, but what you're not, or what you are as well, is actually a leaseholder to the freehold company. So you wear two hats. So as a leaseholder, you could complain that the very company that you are a shareholder of didn't serve the notice correctly, or the invoice. So it's really important to note that that needs to be done. And that goes for all invoices that you're sending out. The slight anomaly is that if you've got a budget which runs March to March and you have an invoice periodic that needs to be sent out that is perhaps 6 months, let's say. So it's March and September, you need to send the invoices out, that's what the lease says. But your budget runs March to March. You actually only need to print that wording on the very first invoice for that year, so the first one, so you're pre-owned. The second one is just the second part of the invoice, but good practice is always print it on the back, then it never gets forgotten. So hopefully that is an insight for you into additional information on what you need to do when you are sending out invoices and collecting service charge. And really, you need to read your lease. Some of the leases won't allow you to collect money in the middle of the year, some of them will, and either way you still need to print all that wording on the back. So let me know if there's any questions you have on this. Obviously there's lots of other invoicing requirements, and we'll look at some of the other videos in due course regarding debt collection and what to do with awkward people who won't pay, and some pitfalls and things. But first things you need to do is obviously read the lease, send the demands out or the service charge bills out in line with the lease, and make sure you've got all the appropriate wording on there and that you act in line with the lease. The lease is king. I can't say that enough. So with that said, please do like the channel, subscribe, comment below if you've got any questions, and please do check out the others. This is a string of ones specifically to do with leasehold. So hopefully they're really useful to you. And with that said, I shall see you next time.